personalities of Walt Disney and Lewis Carroll.
Lewis Carroll liked people. He loved the arts. He loved the theater. He was very fond of music. He was a well-rounded human being. He had a temper, and he did now and then explode, as it were.
Keep your temper.
But only when his own high principles were offended. He would walk out of the theater, for instance, if there was anything sacrilegious on the stage. Apart from that, as a human being, he was absolutely a respectable, decent, loving, and generous man.
3 inches is such a wretched height.
I am exactly 3 inches high.
Both Lewis Carroll and Walt Disney loved to tell stories, and they loved to entertain children, but their approaches were very different.
Lewis Carroll, very intellectual, very cool, loved puzzles and wordplay.
By the way, I have a few more helpful hints. One,
Carroll was a logician, a mathematician, very erudite man who liked to introduce parodies and mathematical games into his work. Walt Disney had a warmer, more direct approach to storytelling.
Most people are attracted to the emotional qualities of Walt's stories. His ability to turn Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from a grim fairy tale into the beautiful feature-length film that it made you laugh and cry and feel like you really knew these characters.
One of Walt's greatest talents was as a story editor, and he had a very strong sense of story structure, how each point had to lead to another logically and emotionally. Carroll, on the other hand, doesn't seem to have been bothered by structure. The Alice books are very episodic, and it's possible to imagine reordering the chapters without it really affecting the way the narrative reads.
Where Lewis Carroll and Walt Disney really found a common ground was to be able to come up with amazing and fantastic characters. With Lewis Carroll, he was able to create characters out of just ordinary figures, a caterpillar, a hare which becomes a March Hare, and a Mad Hatter and the White Rabbit. And then here's Walt can take a character just like a little mouse and turn him into a real personality, a Mickey Mouse. Or Jiminy Cricket. The cricket in the original Pinocchio story is a very minor figure, and imagine giving him the kind of personality that Walt did so that this character of the cricket actually lived well beyond the Pinocchio film.
I wonder if I'll ever get the knack of it.
Walt built on the strong characters Carroll had created, layering his own sense of entertainment on top of them, transforming them in some cases, adding to them and changing them as he felt the film demanded.
Now let's see. Where was I?
There were many times in the production of this film, and this film took many years to reach the screen, when the animators did all kinds of crazy things, and Walt Disney would keep coming back to them and say, no, we don't want that. They're kind of Donald Duck gags. What we want is to get back to the book, get into the characters, look at the personalities. That's where the humor is.
They wanted to be as musical as they could and as humorous as they could, make the story as funny as they possibly could, and not necessarily stick so much to the literal qualities of the novel, but more to the spirit of the book.
For example, there's a jolly freelance madness to the Cheshire Cat that Disney artists picked up on and could embellish the idea, say, by having the cat take his ears off like a hat.
Oh, you're a cat.
A Cheshire Cat, the archaic phrase to grin like a Cheshire Cat, still is something that people are not exactly sure what it meant. But in the county of Cheshire, which is where Dodgson's from, there were cheese shops that had signs that were sometimes painted in the shape of a cat.
that depends on where.
So there'd be a cat, and there maybe was like a crescent-shaped piece of cheese painted on the sign, and so gradually people began to just assume that the crescent was the cat's smile. And so to say that someone was grinning like a Cheshire Cat was referring to the sign above a cheese shop.
Oh, by the way,
It's known that the church at Croft-on-Tees, where Lewis Carroll child's father was a minister, had amongst the carvings on the wall a lion or maybe a cat with what looked like a grin, and certainly for a child sitting in a pew below the carvings, which would be somewhere up on one of the pillars, it looks as though it's grinning. Now, maybe this was the origin of the Cheshire Cat, but it doesn't really matter where the origin comes from. What's really interesting is the character as it's created.
If I were looking for a white rabbit.
These Cheshire Cat sequences were directed by Ward Kimball, but I think John Lounsbury was the actual animator on a lot of them.
Or there's the March Hare.
Kimball is often associated with the character because he praised him as the one character who is cool while everyone else is sort of mad.
But I don't want to go among mad people.
Oh, you can't help that.
Great design, beautiful looking animation, fun voice by Sterling Holloway.
You may have noticed that I'm not all there.
Disney used Sterling Holloway again and again for characters as disparate as Kaa in The Jungle Book and the stork in Dumbo.
Goodness. If the people here are like that, I must try not to upset them.
Alice in Wonderland had a whole series of directors who sort of divided it up as if the stories were divided into chapters like the book is. And each of these segments had sort of a dominant animator who was in charge of a certain character. And Ward Kimball, of all the Disney animators, who was in charge of Tweedledum and Tweedledee and The Walrus and the Carpenter and The Mad Tea Party, really sort of creates the dominant style of the animators in that film.
Ward Kimball's animation is amazing. Some of the most visually surreal stuff he ever did.
Of all the Disney animators that are referred to as the Nine Old Men, Ward Kimball, he was the one who was looked to as sort of the crazy one in the bunch, who instead